Hello, and welcome back to yet another awesome episode of Unscripted with Mike and Jeffrey. Today, we've got some interesting things on tap for you. We got the major signing of Case Cookus. We got the interesting look into the USFL College Draft and some reaction on that. That happened yesterday. It looked like a big success, and you know how we do here on Unscripted. We giving you the XFL coverage that you didn't know you wanted, but now know you need. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to talk about with these alternate football leagues, and a lot of people are excited, about these leagues. One's already begun, one hasn't started yet, but there's a lot to talk about, and I'm looking forward to it.
Me as well. All right. So the first two teams of their drafts here we got the Memphis Showboats, the brand new team replacing the Tampa Bay Bandits. Mm-hmm. And the defending undisputed USFL champion Birmingham Stallions. If you look at these lists for these two teams. What picks stand out to you?
Well, I mean, a lot of these names, unfortunately, are players that not a lot of people know of. I mean, obviously, the one that jumps off the page is Malik Cunningham, quarterback from Louisville. I'm sure Austin's happy about that. But, Birmingham, I mean, it's going to be interesting now that they got Malik Cunningham. Obviously, I think a lot of these players aren't playing, this season or whatever. I think they have, like, the rights, and it's like they're going to have to work it all out. But, they have Jamar Smith, and now you got Malik Cunningham, potentially going to be out of the fold. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works out for Birmingham there. But, I mean, there's a lot of good players. Trey Shropshire, he was really good at UAB, really good receiver. So, I mean, there's just, not a lot of big names, but, just overall solid players. A lot of these players were from smaller schools. It's a lot of them even HBCU and Division II or FCS or whatever as well. So a lot of it's just, players that not a lot of people know of, but they have a lot of potential. And obviously they weren't going to get drafted more than likely. So that's what helps the USFL know that these players are at least going to want to play in this league.
Yes. I mean, to your point with HBCUs and all that, there have been 12 HBCU players drafted in this draft. So that's definitely huge. To your point, yes, most of the players picked in this draft were going to be your like 5th round or lower, or actually 5th round or worse players. So obviously, for example, you said Malik Cunningham jumps off the page for Birmingham here. Well, as as decent or good as Cunningham is, that just goes to show that his value, his stock for the NFL currently is not very high. Because I mean, obviously, we didn't see the projected Stetson Bennett, Bryce Young's, the Sean Clifford, those three. Oh, Max Duggan. We didn't even see Max Duggan. Those 4 were Bryce Young. Everyone was like, they should be funny and just do it. But the other 3, it's
or CJ Stroud. They're not going to do CJ Stroud, players like that.
Yeah. But because it was rumored at one point Max and Stetson and Sean could end up here because their projection is low enough, or it's almost borderline enough to where, okay, maybe. And I mean, that's the thing too. Like, these players just want to just play. These QBs just want to just play. And it's not always necessarily about chasing that bag, so to speak.
Darius Days is another one as well. I think he was at TCU in college. He's a pretty notable name as well. It seems like Birmingham's got more of the notable names than Memphis does, but Memphis has a lot of like the underrated players. Brevin Allen was really good in college. So I mean, I just think overall both these teams have solid players, just not a lot of notable ones outside of Malik Cunningham being the obvious one.
I would definitely agree between these two. So the next two we got on deck is one of my, well, Memphis was one of my teams. One of my other teams got New Orleans and Houston. Now, if I'm looking at this, I'm seeing two teams here that are kind of like you got name poppers on both sides. You've got Isaiah Moore, linebacker. You got DJ Ivy, the corner, and Keaton Mitchell, the running back for New Orleans. To me, those are some big eye poppers. The big eye popper for Houston, in my eyes, is going to be Chase Bryce. And I just have to say this for obvious reasons, but Jeffrey Johnson.
That's funny. Yeah, on both these teams, I mean, Tyler Scott, he was a great receiver at Cincinnati, so that's a great addition for New Orleans. Mitchell, I thought that he was a player that would be in the NFL, and he still could be in the NFL draft. I mean, at East Carolina, he was lighting it up. That actually, oddly enough, the East Carolina-Cincinnati game was one of the best games, between the two teams all season. And, for both teams, that was their best game probably all year. Keaton Mitchell got hit really, badly in that game, and he got a concussion, but then he came back and he was still playing really well. But I think Tyler Scott and Keaton Mitchell are great players that have an NFL future for sure. And Jake Bobo, he was a wide receiver at UCLA. He is a pretty solid player. Probably not as well known as the other, two players, and probably wasn't as draftable, but still solid. Dante Stills was a good defensive lineman at West Virginia. There's a lot more notable names here than on the last, the last two teams. And then, again, with Houston, Chase Bryce, really good quarterback at App State. I mean, he had a journey. I mean, he played at Duke, Clemson, and then App State. He was all over the place just trying to find a home. And App State, he did good. He had turnover problems. That's why he's not in the NFL. He had way too many interceptions. If he had to cut down on the interceptions, then he would be in the NFL. But if he can show and prove that he's a quarterback that is, cleaned up the mistakes and can, have more successful plays versus negative plays in the future, then I think he has a shot in the NFL. Jeffrey Johnson was a great defensive lineman at Oklahoma, which, I mean, if you're playing for Oklahoma, you're probably really good. And overall, both these teams just have solid players. And I think that, this draft, as long as these players do end up playing for these two teams, both teams did a really good job with their additions.
Agreed. I definitely see probably most of these guys playing. Chase Bryce, probably most likely for sure. And with the Chase Bryce pick, they did fill a hole that was desperately needed for Houston. So our next two are my other favorite team in the league, the Pittsburgh Maulers and the Michigan Panthers. Now, if we look over the list here for Pittsburgh, you've got Lindsey Scott Jr. at quarterback. You've got CJ Turner, wide receiver. For me, other than that, I'm not seeing a name on Pittsburgh that pops out. And for Michigan, Santrell Latham, I think, a name that kind of pops. Jim Okorafor, Michigan's 9th round pick there, for me kind of pops out. Definitely heavily needed on the O-line, and the dude is just massive and just a beast at the offensive line. Um, oh, I almost completely forgotten. I'm looking right at it. The big pickup for Michigan is that round 2 pick, Tanner Morgan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think overall, you look at these two teams. I think getting Lindsey Scott Jr. for the Maulers is an interesting pick. He played at Incarnate Word, which I think is interesting. It's an FCS program, and oddly enough, Cameron Ward, who is now at Washington State, at quarterback, also played at Incarnate Word. So I mean, they obviously have some pretty good quarterbacks at that school, which
Mm-hmm.
is awesome. And like you said, C.J. Turner, that's a good addition. But Michigan, I think Michigan did a really good job because you got Tanner Morgan, and yes, he's to me exactly like Chase Bryce, even though he played at Minnesota and Chase Bryce was at App State, but they're turnover prone. And that's why Tanner Morgan's here. If Tanner Morgan, had been able, if he was able to go to the draft or could have gone to the draft, or whatever, just chose to after that 2019 season. I don't know if he was eligible that year. After that year, he would have been a pretty hot pick because he was throwing the ball to Rashad Bateman. There was another receiver too. I can't remember his name, but those two guys, I mean, they were lighting it up that year. And that's when Minnesota beat Auburn in the like the Peach Bowl or Citrus Bowl, one of those bowl games like that.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, Tanner Morgan was a quarterback, had a great season, and then he just kind of declined. And part of it was because his offensive coordinator left after that season, and Minnesota did not have the weapons on offense that they used to have. So his production declined overall, but
Mm-hmm.
he's still a capable quarterback. And I think if he can regain his 2019 form, he could be an NFL quarterback. But it's been 3 or 4 years since that season, so he's going to have to return to form. I think it's really good that Michigan got 4 offensive linemen in this draft because they needed it. Their offensive line was awful last year, and getting offensive linemen that are all really solid, I think is going to help out Michigan overall with whoever's at quarterback. Gunnar Oaks, he was a really good tight end in Eastern Michigan. Not a lot of people know about him, but he's an underrated player. And again, that's why, you get guys like this that you've never really heard of before pop up in these leagues and end up playing really well. I think he's a guy to watch. But overall, I think both teams did well. But I really like Michigan's selections.
Yeah, to your point, I completely agree. Michigan's selections look a lot stronger as far as drafting needs instead of wants or like big namers.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the fact that Lindsey Scott came from Incarnate Word, definitely that's huge for Pittsburgh to do that, and hopefully he does get some time. I'm sure he won't be the starter, which stinks. But I mean, if he gets a chance to prove himself, definitely go out and prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, great drafts overall. Definitely, if we graded this, I would grade Michigan's better for sure, like you said. But still, overall, just great for these two. So the next two that we've got are the 2022 um, North Division Championship game, the New Jersey Generals and the Philadelphia Stars. Now here we go. Now we're starting to get bigger names here. Adrian Martinez at New Jersey for sure, huge.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Jermaine McDaniel Jr., edge rusher. That's got to be big. J.J. Holman for New Jersey. You look at Philadelphia. Philadelphia, I'm not really seeing much, but I mean, what's your take on these two?
Well, I mean, you look at obviously, like you said, I mean, Adrian Martinez is going to, pop off the page because everybody remembers him at Nebraska and just waiting for him to break out and, potentially, be the best quarterback or at least one of the top quarterbacks in the Big Ten. It never happened. And a lot of it was for a lot of different reasons. Poor offensive line play for Nebraska. They're snapping the balls over his head, poor play calling, and he was turnover prone himself. And overall just was a mess at Nebraska. He transfers to Kansas State, and he does better, but he still struggles because he got benched for Will Howard midseason. So I thought he played better at Kansas State, but it wasn't good enough for him to keep starting jobs. So again, he's going to have to, find consistency in this league if he's going to be, a potential NFL quarterback, because the talent's there, the athleticism's there. It's the consistency that's the problem for Adrian Martinez. And I mean, you look at some of the other players. I mean, Adam Korsak, great punter at Rutgers. And you always want a good punter. I know a lot of people don't like drafting a punter because it's like, why are you drafting a punter? You could just get him after the fact. But if you like a punter and you need it and he's really good, then I think it's still a good pick, even though you usually apply drafting, skill position players over a punter. But I think that's a good pick. They also picked a long snapper out of Purdue and Nick Zacchino. That's an interesting pick as well. Again, why are you drafting a long snapper? A lot of people would say. But if he's really good at what he does, I don't see an issue with it. Because at least it shores up those positions where you're not going to have problems there. And then with Philadelphia, I mean, Jose Ramirez was a really good defensive end at Eastern Michigan. So, I mean, even though, again, kind of like, a lot of these other picks, like Gunnar Oaks, also from Eastern Michigan, not a big name. Not many people know who they are, but they were really good. The MAC does have good players. You just have to find them. Truman Jones is a good defensive end. Overall, I think both teams did a solid job. Not as many big names here. I mean, there's not like a lot of well-known players, but you still have Adrian Martinez, and you've got a lot of diamond in the rough players that are going to be probably really solid in the USFL.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I mean, with your point with Adrian, it's like, USFL is basically there as like an NFL buffer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, you possibly have the NFL qualities, but you're not quite there yet. It's not, just give up on your dream now. It's go to the USFL and try to develop and tweak what you have so that, eventually you're going to get that call.
Mm-hmm.